Well, I bet you didn't see this coming. When becoming a fan of Big Brother, one of the biggest points of confusion is learning that practically nobody has seen season 1. The format was a little different, and people always said that there wasn't any game to be played. So because of that, it's often written off as a season that you can skip. Even I had never seen Big Brother 1. Up until a few months ago. I finally sat myself down, watched all 70 episodes, and after finishing it up, I realized that there actually was a game being played, and nobody understood that more than Eddie. Back in the year 2000, 10 people eagerly awaited the opportunity to enter the first US Big Brother house. 9 of them went in ready to have the experience of a lifetime and make lifelong friends. But one of them didn't care about all that. Instead, they were laser focused on one thing and one thing only: winning. They weren't there to make friends. They weren't there to have a crazy experience. They were there to win the money, and they were ready to cut everyone in their path to make it happen. How did it work out for them? Let's find out. This is the story of how Eddie McGee won Big Brother 1.
My name is Eddie, and I live in Comac, New York. What it would take for me to quit the Big Brother house would probably be 2 bounces, about $275 a piece, and they'd have to drag me out.
If you aren't already, consider subscribing. We are getting closer and closer to 100,000 subscribers, and every sub helps. Thanks. Eddie McGee was a 21-year-old college student from New York, majoring in broadcasting and minoring in theater. And he auditioned for the show after a buddy of his suggested it due to being the exact opposite of what people would think somebody with a disability would be like. Eddie had lost his left leg to cancer at the age of 11, but he never looked at his situation and thought, why me? And instead, he looked ahead, saying, well, this happened. Now deal with it and move forward.
I lost my leg to cancer when I was 11.
In terms of mentally, I mean, there was no real period of why me? It was just like, well, this happened, now deal with it.
Eddie was attending university in Texas on a full athletic scholarship for wheelchair basketball. And in his intro package, you can see him rock climbing and doing backflips off of a diving board. Eddie was an athlete, and he was competitive, and he looked at Big Brother for what it was: a competition. He didn't care who else was in the house with him. He was there to win, and he wasn't letting anyone get in between himself and the money. So let's jump ahead into night 1 to see how Eddie traversed through this very different and unique season of Big Brother.
All right, you ready? Because I know I am.
Eddie entered the Big Brother house alongside 9 other house guests, all eagerly awaiting what was promised to be the experience of a lifetime. Because there are so few house guests, I think I can actually take a moment and introduce you to them all. There was Josh, the 23-year-old student, Jordan, the 26-year-old former exotic dancer, Curtis, the 28-year-old attorney, Cassandra, the 37-year-old United Nations communications officer, George, the 41-year-old roofer, Karen, the 43-year-old mother, Will Mega, the 27-year-old youth counselor, Brittany, the 25-year-old sales rep, and Jamie, the 22-year-old Miss Washington. After all the house guests had introduced themselves and settled in, you could say that the game had officially begun. But what exactly was the game? Well, unlike today's Big Brother, there were no competitions for power. There would be no HOH. There would be no veto. Instead, everyone inside the house held an equal amount of power. Every week, each player would secretly vote for 2 players to be nominated. After everyone voted, the 2 house guests with the most votes would be nominated for banishment. Instead of calling them evictions, they were called banishments. If there was a tie in votes, then every person involved in the tie would just be nominated, meaning that there could technically be 3 or 4 or any number of nominees, which I thought was very fun. After the nominees were decided upon, the power would turn over to the viewers. The audience at home could call in and vote for whichever nominee they wanted to see leave the house, and at the end of the voting period, whichever nominee received the highest percentage of votes would be banished from the house. Then, at the end of the season, when there were only a few players remaining, America would vote for whichever player they wanted to see win the game, and the house guest with the highest number of votes would walk away with the $500,000 grand prize. So, there was certainly a lot less strategy than in modern day Big Brother, but that didn't mean that there was no strategy to be had. If you played nice in the house and made friends with everyone, then the other players would likely not vote for you, and you could avoid nomination. But even if you were nominated, you could play up to the cameras and try to entertain the audience to entice them into keeping you, all in the hopes that they wouldn't vote to banish you. So there was still a game to be played here, albeit a different one than we're used to seeing, but you can certainly see some similarities between the two formats. Okay, now that we've established what Big Brother 1 actually is, let's jump back into the game. Things started out pretty good for Eddie in the house. It appeared that he was making friends with both Brittany and Karen, and Jamie publicly admitted that she was attracted to Eddie in the house.
Question is, are you attracted to anyone now in the house?
Okay, I'll say one of my people, Eddie.
So right off the bat, that is not a bad start. However, tension arose pretty quickly between Eddie and Jordan. Jordan had continuously been making negative comments about models throughout the first week, knowing full well that Eddie's girlfriend outside of the house was a model. So this obviously annoyed Eddie. However, instead of letting this conflict fester into something greater, Eddie approached Jordan to talk things out and try to resolve their differences. Regardless of whether or not this was a strategic move or just Eddie being himself, this was a good game move and indicated that Eddie was thinking smart. In a game where the only way you're going to get nominated is by the other house guests voting for you, you want as few enemies as possible. So Eddie, trying to work things out with Jordan, was a good move for his game.
Jordan, like 3 times today, she was knocking out models. I'm like, come on, man. You know my girlfriend's a model. Why are you gonna be stupid?
Eddie and Jordan resolve their differences.
I'd rather there not be attention. I'd rather resolve our problems right now. You want to wipe a new, clean slate? Hey, that's fine.
I want the same thing.
Okay.
I do. And I wish that you would engage more, I guess. Like, I want to know who you are.
As the first week progressed, one thing that quickly stood out about Eddie was that he was pretty much the only person there that was open about the fact that their main focus and desire was winning the money. Everyone in the house had a purpose for being there, whether it be to learn something about themselves or to go on this big adventure. But Eddie was blunt and said he was there to win the money for himself and to take care of his family. Eddie's bluntness and realness struck a chord with the audience. He wasn't performing for the cameras in an attempt to sway the audience in his favor. He was just being himself, the straightforward, blunt Eddie.
So why'd you say you came here again, Eddie?
Let's see. For money.
What?
Why'd you come here, Will? Come keep it real?
The fact of the matter is that, yeah, you might be in here for the experience, but it still comes down to the money.
When you combine that with the fact that many of the viewers were inherently already looking at Eddie in a sympathetic light, it put Eddie as the audience favorite. In this first week, Big Brother even brought in a professional Las Vegas odds maker and tasked him to make odds on each house guest's chances of winning the game. And he had given Eddie the best odds out of anyone, giving him 5-2 odds to take the crown, which translates to roughly 28%.
And Eddie, you have at the top of the list, 5-2 odds. Why?
Well, I think America in general loves an underdog. Eddie's the underdog here. He's overcome a lot. He's the one to catch right now.
While Eddie had already effortlessly attained a position as an audience favorite, that unfortunately didn't translate the same inside the house. Some house guests, such as Will, Mega, and Jordan, found it difficult to connect and converse with Eddie because of his dryness, and they didn't see much of a reason to keep Eddie in the house because of it. On top of that, Eddie slept a lot and didn't contribute to the house chores as much as everyone else, which placed a little bit of a target on his back. So, when the time came to make first nominations, Eddie was one of the names up in the air for possible nomination. Jordan, Will Mega, and Cassandra all voted to nominate Eddie. Jordan, because she didn't like his attitude, Will, because he didn't see any benefit to keeping Eddie in the house, and Cassandra, because she felt Eddie slept too much and didn't do enough of the chores. That was 3 votes against Eddie, which certainly isn't great. Would it be enough to get him nominated, though? Eddie had voted for Jordan and Will Mega because Eddie felt that those two were the root of the majority of conflict that had been occurring in the house, and luckily for Eddie, the majority of the house felt that way too. Will Mega received 6 total nomination votes, and Jordan received 5, which made them the 2 highest vote getters for the week and resulted in them being the 2 nominees, keeping Eddie safe.
First person I nominate is Jordan.
Jordan.
My second nomination is Mega.
Will.
William.
Brittany.
Brittany.
Eddie.
Eddie. Karen.
Karen.
Curtis.
The nominees are William and Jordan.
Getting 3 nomination votes was an indicator that Eddie might be seeing the chopping block a few times throughout the season, but at least for the very first week, he was safe. Now, after the nominations were set, Eddie got into it with Will. Each week, the house guests were given tasks to complete, and depending on how well they did, they would either gain or lose money that could be used for groceries during the week. Will had purposely thrown the weekly competition, losing money for everyone in the house, and this frustrated Eddie deeply. Eddie figured Will might have thrown the competition in retaliation for Eddie and a couple of others keeping Will up the night prior after throwing a sleepover in the living room, but Eddie was mad that Will took it out on everyone instead of just being mad at Eddie and the others that participated. The two argued in the backyard over it, but Eddie wasn't concerned with the repercussions because he was convinced that William would be banished by the end of the week. In a way, this may have actually made Eddie more popular with the audience because many of the viewers weren't very fond of William, and Eddie was also kind of sticking up for the other house guests in this fight, which made him seem like the good guy while William was seen as the bad guy. While many in the house would air their grievances behind closed doors, Eddie would confront those he had problems with face to face, and I think this garnered Eddie a lot of respect from the viewers. I can't say this for certain because it is extremely difficult to find anything about Big Brother 1 nowadays, but that's just my best guess.
So he intentionally threw the game, and I have no respect for that, and I won't tolerate that.
To me, you back. You didn't just me, you everyone else. How stupid is that? You want to me, you come over here and you me on the side. You know, everybody.
That was half the house, dog.
No. Okay, so fine. Boom, half the house. So half the house with you. So you got the other half to prove that you're man, you're big dog?
No.
Come on, man. Best luck to you, man, because you're going to need it.
I don't believe in luck.
You're going to need it.
Anyways, by the end of the week, Eddie's assumption about William being booted was correct because with 73% of the audience vote, Will Mega was officially banished from the Big Brother house.
The first person to be banished from the house is William.
Yes, I'm outie.
Good luck, dog.
I promise the rest of these rounds are going to go by a lot faster now that I don't have to do a lot of exposition and explaining of the rules, so get ready. At the final 9, we saw as Eddie began growing closer and closer to Jamie. There had been some rumors flying around the house that Jamie had a crush on Eddie, and the two of them started hanging out more in the house, although nothing too crazy was coming from it because Eddie did have his girlfriend back at home. Eddie also began getting closer with Chicken George around this time too, and you could see the relationship grow in the house. For the record, George started going by Chicken George around this time because of how much time he spent caring for the house chickens. Anyways, George opened up to Eddie that he sometimes felt intimidated by Curtis because Curtis would sometimes make him feel stupid when they played card games together. And Eddie was there for George and told him that he'd sit in for the next card game and say something if he saw it happen, which was a really nice moment between the two.
That Curtis intimidates me sometimes, Eddie. I notice when I play cards and that sometimes he makes me sometimes feel like I'm stupid or something, you know?
Yeah? You know what? I'll sit down in one of those games. I'll watch. I'll talk to him if I see that. If he makes you feel stupid, I'll kick his ass.
Eddie had a lot of respect for George because he had a work ethic and way of living that reminded him of his own father, and their dynamic was very nice to watch.
But you're a good, like I say, Eddie, no matter what happened, you're an alright dude.
Thanks, George.
But there was one person that Eddie continued to grow distant from. Jordan. Eddie simply did not like the way Jordan acted in the house, and he wanted her gone. Past that, though, we saw Eddie start thinking of long-term game plans in the game. Eddie laid out that he saw there were two different sides of the house. On one side, there was himself, Brittany, Karen, and George. On the other side, there was Jamie, Josh, Curtis, and Jordan. And floating in the middle was Cassandra. The way Eddie saw it was that whichever 4 took out the other 4 would be the final 4. So Eddie revealed to Brittany that he actually had a strategy for who he was going to nominate each week. He said he wanted his 4 to stick together and that his ideal boot order would be Jordan, Jamie, Josh, Curtis, and then Cassandra, which would then leave himself, Brittany, Karen, and George in the final 4. Then, he had a plan for the final four, where he would stick with Brittany and trick the other two into nominating the other, which would keep himself and Brittany safe going into the final three. In a game where it didn't seem like there was much strategy to be had, Eddie was actually strategizing, and it made sense. Not too many players were concerning themselves with the strategy of the game, whereas Eddie had mapped out his ideal entire season, which showcased that Eddie understood the game on a pretty deep level, and it continued the narrative that he was the front runner to win.
I see Jamie, Curtis, Josh, Jordan over here. I see Karen, George, Brittany, and myself over here. Now, the way I see it, whichever four destroys the other four will be the final four.
Eddie reveals his nomination strategy.
As of today, this is my order of marking. It'd be Jordan, and Jamie, and Josh, Curtis, Cassandra. Then after Cassandra, you'd go to one and I'd go to the other. So it would be a draw like between Karen and George if they're still here. Whoops.
This is so bad of us.
No, it's not. It's all going to come down to cutthroat sooner or later.
When it was time for nominations, Eddie and his group all stuck together and voted to nominate Jordan and Curtis. And while Eddie received 4 nomination votes from Jordan, Curtis, Jamie, and Cassandra, there wasn't enough structure with the other side of the house, and that disarray led to Eddie barely surviving the vote. Curtis received 6 votes, and Jordan received 5, so those two were the final nominees for the week.
Last night, George shared with me that Curtis had been talking down to him and making him feel stupid and this and that, so I nominate Curtis.
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 Curtis. Curtis.
Curtis.
I nominate Jordan.
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 Jordan. Eddie.
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 Karen.
Karen.
George.
Eddie, with 4 nominations, barely escaped being marked. The house guests who are marked for banishment tonight are Curtis and Jordan.
By the end of the week, Eddie once again got his wish, and Jordan was banished from the house with 78% of the public vote. The 2 main people Eddie had conflicts with were the first 2 people booted from the house, so Eddie was flying high at this point.
The house guest to be banished is Jordan.
Bye, Eddie.
It's been a pleasure. Take care.
At the final 8, Eddie lost a little bit of his power structure because people started getting a little perturbed by Karen. Jamie in particular was shocked at how much talk Karen had been doing about kicking people out of the house and banding together to make it happen. It made Karen a target. Curtis agreed with Jamie, and even George started feeling this way about Karen too, meaning that the so-called alliance between Eddie, George, and Karen was starting to fall apart.
Karen, Eddie, and George, I think, had an alliance of sorts. You know?
They did, definitely.
And I think that has sort of maybe fallen apart.
Starting to, yeah.
In its place, it seemed like a new dynamic was forming in the house between the guys and the girls. Eddie began forming a closer bond with Josh, which would be good for Eddie's long-term survival because it seemed like he might be losing Karen as a number now that the tide was turning against her. When nominations came, though, I don't think Eddie was thinking too much along the lines of guys versus girls, which I think was the right call for him. His first nomination vote was Curtis, just because, and his second nomination vote was for Jamie, also just because. But really, I think this was Eddie still trying to follow through with his pecking order plan that he had made the prior round. As for the rest of the house, only Curtis threw a nomination vote Eddie's way. Eddie had gotten a minimum of 3 votes each of the prior 2 rounds, so only getting 1 vote this week was awesome. Josh ended up receiving the most nomination votes with 5, likely due to the fact that he had been involved in a love triangle between Brittany and Jordan for quite a while, and his indecisiveness while Jordan was still in the house made the other house guests question where Josh's head was really at. After Josh, there was a tie for second, with Karen and Cassandra both receiving 3 votes, meaning that for the first time this season, there would be 3 nominees.
First nomination is Curtis.
Curtis.
Second nominee is Jamie.
Josh.
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 Karen. Karen.
Karen.
Cassandra.
Cassandra.
Brittany.
Eddie.
For the first time, 3 of them have been marked for banishment. Josh, Cassandra, and Karen.
There had been some ups and downs throughout the first 3 rounds, but Eddie had successfully avoided nomination every single time, so he deserves some credit for that. By the end of the week, the viewers' banishment vote was a decisive one. Josh received 9% of the votes, Cassandra received 15%, and Karen received a whopping 76% of the votes, meaning that Karen became the third house guest to be banished from Big Brother 1. If the house was starting to feel empty, Big Brother has you covered, because they gave the house guests a cute dog named Chiquita this week to help keep them company.
Josh, you got 9%. Karen, it wasn't even close. You received 76% of the votes for banishment.
What's up, baby? My pleasure.
Oh, God, it's been great.
Going into the final 7, a poll was conducted on AOL.com to determine which house guests were actually the audience favorites. And these were the results. In first place, by a landslide, was Brittany with 33% of the votes. In second place was George with 17%. In third place was Cassandra with 12%. In fourth place, there was a three-way tie between Eddie, Jamie, and Josh with 10% each. And in last place was Curtis with 8%. Now, this seems like a huge drop in ratings for Eddie from when he was the predicted fan favorite in week 1. But to be fair, Eddie was not getting that much screen time compared to everyone else. It's not that the audience didn't like Eddie, they just weren't being shown him that much compared to the likes of Brittany and George. So things weren't actually as dire as they might seem from that poll. Anyways, back to the house, I think it's time I should talk more about one of Eddie's more interesting relationships. Since week 2, Eddie had been avoiding Jamie and worked to keep some distance between them. Jenny had been really confused as to why this was, and she finally confronted Eddie about it during the final 8 round. Eddie came clean to her and said that the reason he seemed distant around her is because he found himself attracted to her, and that he could see himself pursuing a relationship with her in the outside world. Eddie correctly assessed that Jamie felt similarly to him, but because he had a girlfriend, he couldn't really explore that in the house. It was an interesting dynamic between the two, because even though you could tell that there was some magnetism between them, it actually had like an inverse effect on their game. From here on out, both of them would nominate each other almost every single week, which I find to be pretty funny. Speaking of which, the nominations this week were crazy. Eddie, continuing on from the last round, nominated Curtis and Jamie once again, so nothing out of the ordinary there. What was out of the ordinary was the end result. Out of the 7 players in the house, 6 of them ended up being nominated. George had the most votes with 3, and then Josh, Brittany, Cassandra, Curtis, and Eddie all had 2 votes, which was enough to get all of them nominated. Jamie was literally the only person that wasn't nominated this round, which is crazy. Curtis and Jamie were the only votes for Eddie, with Curtis's reasoning being that he just wasn't super close with Eddie, and Jamie claiming that she rolled the dice to determine it. But since the numbers were dwindling down in the house, 2 votes were enough for Eddie to be nominated.
I nominate Jamie and Curtis.
Curtis.
Brittany.
Brittany.
Eddie.
Eddie.
Joshua.
Josh. Cassandra.
Cassandra.
George.
George.
George. The house guests have spoken. George, Brittany, Cassandra, Curtis, Eddie, and Josh have been marked for banishment.
This was Eddie's first time on the chopping block, but since there were 5 others next to him, the odds were in his favor that he would stay. However, the banishment results actually ended up being a huge shocker, and that was all thanks to the biggest strategic player in the entire game, George's wife. George's family back at home obviously wanted George to win badly, and they were willing to take any step necessary in order to make that happen. George was a pretty popular house guest at the time, but clearly, based on that poll from earlier in the week, Brittany was the most popular, and therefore, George's biggest competition. So, after George was marked for banishment, George's wife rallied the troops and led a massive telethon campaign in their hometown to get as many people to vote for Brittany as possible. The way that you would vote as a viewer was by calling a 900 phone number. However, it cost 99 cents to do so. But a local company offered to cover all of the voting expenses during the campaign, basically meaning that you could vote for free as long as you were voting for whoever George's family wanted gone.
The campaign began, obviously, when George said Brittany needed to go out of the house when he nominated her.
We're just trying to win the game here, and I'm trying to do the best thing for George.
Want us to concentrate our efforts on one candidate. She suggested Brittany.
She is his biggest competition, so you got to get rid of the competition.
The bill that's coming in for the 900 numbers to help support George, our company's going to take care of that.
This was very controversial, to say the least, and it started turning some of the public against George. But the campaign was actually successful this time around. Out of all of the votes, Josh received 6%, Curtis received 9%, Eddie received 13%, George received 18%, Cassandra received 20%, and Brittany received a majority 34%, meaning that Brittany, the most popular house guest, was banished in 7th place.
Jamie, please read the results.
The house guest to be banished is Brittany.
Whoa. You good, baby? I'll be talking to you soon, okay? Okay. You be strong.
Brittany! We love you, Brett!
We love you, Brett!
Everyone was shocked at the result. Brittany was the last person anyone expected to leave, and it really set the tone that nobody was safe in this game. In a way, it was good for Eddie to have a big threat like that out of the way, but on the other hand, Eddie could very well be the next victim of George's family. They had no plans of stopping their campaign, and none of the house guests had any idea that it was happening.
That's a cool sign, and she's definitely going to see it.
Going into the final 6, Eddie began struggling with how he was going to handle his nominations moving forward, and he opened up to Cassandra about it. Before Brittany was banished, Eddie got to the point where he realized that he probably should start voting against Brittany upon learning that she was the most popular house guest, because that made her the biggest threat to him getting paid, even though they were really good friends. The decision between friendship and money was starting to weigh on him a little bit more than it had before, but he was sticking to his guns and still had his sights set on the money, regardless of how cutthroat it made him out to be.
I love Britt. Britt is a doll.
Yeah.
You know, she's the most popular, and I'm seeing her as the biggest threat. The biggest threat to me getting paid. I love her, but I'm like, yo, your ass needs to go.
As much sadness and heartache we see in Brittany going, everyone in here is a little bit more, oh wow, I'm that much closer. Anyone in here who tells you different is a liar.
However, this mentality came at a price, and Eddie found himself in some hot water later in the week. Big Brother gave the house guests a hypothetical and asked them if they would be willing to pool together the first, second, and third place prizes and split it amongst the 6 of them. With the way the math worked out, each of them would get roughly $108,000, which is quite the pretty penny. But guess who was the only person who said they wouldn't do it? Eddie. Eddie said that they all knew what they signed up for when they auditioned to be on the show, and as much as he'd like to give each player their $108,000, he'd much rather things stay the way they are, with the winner receiving $500,000. This rubbed the other house guests the wrong way, because they would all be ecstatic at the idea of not just getting over $100,000 for themselves, but also getting to share that with everyone left, giving everyone a taste of wealth that they could use to help their families. Some of the house guests had a hard time wrapping their heads around the fact that Eddie would rather take the 1 in 6 shot and continue fighting to become the sole winner instead of walking out of the house with everyone being co-winners. But that's just who Eddie was. Eddie wanted the money, and he wanted the win. He acknowledged in the diary room that he knew people weren't thrilled with his answer, and that he could have told them what they wanted to hear, but he wasn't gonna lie, because he's not like that.
Prize money would be $650,000 split 6 ways. That's $108,000 each. I would definitely do that.
Yep.
That's
I
better
would
than
definitely
second
go
place.
for that option.
Eddie? Wouldn't. The reason why I wouldn't do it is just because we knew what we were getting into coming into this. I don't know, there's no real glory or triumph. There should be a winner, you know what I'm saying? I say we go all the way. One person with 500, one person with 100, one person with 50. I mean, money's not even an issue.
Mm-hmm.
It's just principle.
I don't think they liked my response. I could have told them what they wanted to hear and said, no, I think everybody should have it and we should live happy, but no. Out of sheer competitiveness, I say let the game go on.
George became worried that Eddie was going to face some serious repercussions because of this stance and that it would make him a target for nomination. And he was right. Maybe. Although nobody outright said it was their reason for nominating him, Eddie received the most nomination votes in the House with 3, alongside Curtis and Cassandra, making them the 3 nominees for the week.
I nominate Curtis and Cassandra.
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 Curtis.
Curtis.
Joshua.
George. Jamie.
Eddie.
Eddie. Eddie.
The House guests have made their decision. Cassandra, Curtis, and Eddie have been marked, and you can vote for one of them to be banished from the Big Brother house.
Now, something very important happened during the day of nominations. Josh got the opportunity to speak with Brittany for a couple of short minutes, and in this time frame, Brittany said 2 things. Firstly, she said that the 2 people Josh could trust in the house were Curtis and Eddie, which, hey, that's great news for Eddie. The second thing was that Brittany informed Josh about the campaign that George's family held to banish her from the game, and she warned him that they were going to continue doing this and voting out the next most popular player as long as George was still in the game.
You can trust Curtis and you can trust Eddie. George's wife organized this whole Vote Brittany Out campaign. They're gonna vote out every single person that's the next most popular. It's crazy outside. It's mean.
This was pretty crucial information to know, but Josh decided to keep this information to himself. However, he didn't really get the chance to. A bunch of plane banners flew over the house that were very clearly anti-George, and eventually, Josh spilled the beans on what he had been told by Brittany. At this point, George went on a campaign himself to try and get everyone to walk out from the show and take a stand. But of course, Eddie ended up holding out and not wanting to do it, and ultimately the walk didn't amount to anything, and nobody left.
If I walk out of here, I risk being humiliated. I risk losing all the money, but everything is sweetened by risk.
So you were committed to walking out this morning?
I'm human, man. I told you this morning I would, now I go back. I don't know. I see me regretting if I walk on Wednesday.
Funnily enough, earlier in the week, the house guests were all tempted with $50,000 if they left the game right then and there. And had anyone accepted the offer, a new house guest, Beth, would have been unleashed into the house. But nobody took the money, and Beth went unused. Anyways, the banishment vote soon approached, and this was by far the closest that Eddie came from being booted from the show. Eddie received 41% of the audience votes, but Cassandra got slightly more at 46%, meaning that she was banished and Eddie was spared. This was about as close as it gets, but Eddie surviving a banishment next to Cassandra was actually quite impressive. She polled better than he did on the fan vote the round prior, so the odds weren't in his favor that he came out on top.
It was a very tight race between 2 of you. Eddie, you had 41% of the vote. Cassandra, you had 46%. You've been banished.
Following the super close vote, Eddie vowed to play the game as strategically as he could from here on out. Eddie had refrained from voting for George prior to this because he had the utmost respect for George and wanted to see him win if he couldn't win himself. But now, that wasn't an option anymore. Eddie needed George gone if he wanted to win the game. So even though the 2 were as close as could be and had never nominated the other one beforehand, that had come to an end. Eddie opened up to the house guests that this is what he was going to do moving forward, and he stuck to it.
From here on out, I will be playing the game as strategically as I can to protect what is in my best interest, and that is myself making it to the end of the game and ultimately winning.
From now on, nomination rounds, as long as I'm here, will be based upon a strategy, if you want to call it. I'm going to be looking out for me, bottom line. I came here to win, and I will do what I have to do it.
Eddie voted to nominate George and Jamie as he saw them as the 2 most likable people left in the house, and he felt it was the best strategic move for him to make. George received 4 votes for nomination, and Eddie, Curtis, and Jamie all tied for second with 2 votes apiece, meaning the 4 of them would all be nominated for banishment. As for who nominated Eddie, it was the usual suspects in Curtis and Jamie.
This week I nominate Jamie and George.
George.
Jamie.
Eddie.
Curtis.
George, Curtis, Eddie, and Jamie have all been marked for banishment.
With so few people left in the game, not that much of interest happened this week, and banishment night came quickly. Eddie's percentage lowered now that he wasn't up against Cassandra, as he received a measly 14% of the banishment votes, while George couldn't escape the cloud of controversy that now surrounded him, and he received 51% of the votes, making him the house guest banished in 5th place. George had become the character of the season, and with him out of the way, the path to the money had never been clearer. All Eddie had to do was make it past one more banishment, and he'd be sitting in the end.
Curtis, you had 3%. Eddie, 14%. Jamie, 32%. And George, 51%. That means you've been banished.
That's okay.
Damn kids.
Oh my god, all the adults are gone.
Going into the Final Four, the ultimate goal for Eddie was to not be nominated. But Eddie figured that Jamie and Curtis were both going to nominate him like they always did. So in the hopes of strategically counteracting their votes in order to increase the chances of his own survival, he voted for the two of them as well. Although he wasn't fully correct in his assessment, he got the main gist of it. Unfortunately, Eddie did get nominated, but the good news is that everyone else got nominated too. It was a 2-2-2-2 tie. I just said 2 8 times in a row. Sorry. It was a 2-2-2-2 tie vote between the four of them, meaning that for the final banishment of the summer, everyone was up for grabs.
I nominate Curtis and Jamie.
I nominate Curtis and I nominate Jamie.
I nominate Eddie and Josh.
I'm going to nominate Eddie, and I'm going to nominate Josh.
All of you have been marked for banishment.
Hagita, I nominated you. But they didn't count that one.
At this point, the strategic game was largely finished, as there would be no more voting from the players inside. So AOL thought it would be fun to ask the audience who they felt had the best strategy to win. The answer, to hopefully nobody's surprise, was Eddie, getting the majority, 53% of voters in this one. And even though this technically didn't mean anything, it was still a really good sign of things to come. If any of the viewers at home were voting based on who they thought played the best game, then Eddie would have a real good shot at receiving the majority of those votes. So if he could make it past this one last banishment, he could be sitting pretty.
We asked, who do you think has the best strategy to win? 53% said Eddie.
And he's been the most vocal about actually perhaps having a strategy.
He's the strategist.
The final banishment of the summer was announced pretty quickly, and the last player leaving the Big Brother house was Jamie, with 31% of the votes.
Eddie, Curtis, Josh, you're all staying in the house. Jamie, you have been banished.
Good one, bro.
18 to 12, 30 rounds.
Eddie had done it. He had made it past 7 rounds, survived 4 nominations for banishment, and now he was sitting in the final 3. All he had to do was beat Josh and Curtis in the final viewer vote. This was not going to be a cakewalk for Eddie, though. Every single time either Josh or Curtis were nominated for banishment, they always received the least amount of votes to leave, meaning that they both had very dedicated fans out there, whereas Eddie was always towards the middle or top of the votes on his banishment nights. But there was nothing left for Eddie to do. He had made it as far as he could in the game, and they couldn't really do anything else to gain favor with the audience. The viewers were going to vote however they pleased, so all Eddie could do was celebrate with Josh and Curtis in a wait finale night.
5 reasons why I think I should win.
My first reason is my niece. I would like to be able to put her through college.
Number 2, by winning this money, I will be given the opportunity to put my brother through proper schooling.
My third reason is that I have close to $20,000 in student loans that I'd like to pay back.
Fourth, I think the money would be wonderful.
And number 5, because I want it more than anyone else.
When finale night came, the polls seemed to be in Eddie's favor, but all that mattered was the official Big Brother vote. Before announcing the winner, Julie came on and announced who came in third place. With 14% of the vote, the third place finisher was Curtis.
Third place goes to Curtis.
This meant that Eddie now had just one lone player in his way of the win. Josh. Across the entire season, these two had never once nominated the other for banishment. They had grown extremely close to one another to the point that they called each other their best friend. and now they were the final 2 players standing. Julie actually entered the house and sat with the final 2 to reveal the winner, which I thought was very cool and added a personal touch to the grand finale.
Hey guys.
How you doing?
What's up?
What's happening?
This was it. The big moment. Julie opened the envelope with the winner's name on it, and with 59% of the vote, the winner of the first Big Brother was Eddie.
The grand prize winner with 59% of the vote is Eddie.
Good job, buddy.
Eddie's reaction to winning is one of my favorites. He had been envisioning that moment since the second he walked through that door, and to see it finally materialize in front of him was the most rewarding outcome the season could have had. If you asked Eddie at any point throughout the season what the most important thing to him was, he would have looked you in the eyes and said winning. Time after time, he made it clear that his intentions coming into the game were the money and the money alone. But as the season progressed and the weeks kept piling on, you could tell that wasn't fully the truth anymore. Sure, Eddie still wanted the win, but the human element of Big Brother began influencing Eddie in a way that he didn't expect. He started actually caring for these people. His bond with George in particular showcased the part of Eddie that he didn't anticipate would come to life in the game, and it made him more real. Eddie was human, not just this robot programmed to win and nothing else. And seeing the personal side to him ironically ended up being the secret ingredient to him winning the game. It made him more rootable, it endeared him to the audience, and it gave them a reason to want him to win, leading to him getting a whopping 59% of the viewers' votes at the end.
I'm just awestruck. I did not expect to win. I am just, can't even describe it, to tell you the truth. It's just wild.
I know it's weird to try and rank Eddie as a player, seeing as to how this game was vastly different from the Big Brother we know today. But if we look at this season for what it was, it's clear that Eddie was the best player inside that house. He understood the game better than anyone else, and he enacted a strategy in a time where there were 0 blueprints on what to do. He was the first person to come up with the idea of a voting block. He was one of the only people to openly discuss strategy in the game, and he also showcased a cutthroat nature that we didn't see from the other players. Eddie was very close with both Brittany and George throughout the game, yet he eventually recognized that he needed to start voting to nominate them once he saw how popular they were outside of the house, because that meant they were dangerous obstacles standing in the way of his win. He didn't want them to leave, but he knew that they had to, and he deserves credit for taking the necessary strides to make it happen. Socially, Eddie could have done a bit better inside the house, as he was nominated an awful lot, and it did take him some time to warm up to everyone. But at the same time, Eddie knew that his perception inside the house was not nearly as important as his perception outside the house, so I won't dock him too many points. In the scope of Big Brother 1's game, I would give Eddie a 7.7 out of 10. Even though he was the best strategic player, he wasn't the best social player, and he came dangerously close to being banished in 6th place over Cassandra. Now, this rating is not to be compared to the other Big Brother winners, because Eddie played a different game than them, and you can't necessarily translate those two things one-to-one. If I was forced to give Eddie a rating that was on the same scale as all the other Big Brother winners, I'd honestly give him a 5, because he showcased enough strategy to make me believe that he'd be able to hang with some of the other Big Brother winners, but I think his bluntness would make him too easy of a target, and he'd probably see the block quite a few times. This rating does not matter, and is already just a hypothetical fabrication between two totally different games, but I thought it would be fun to give him one anyways, just because.
It's cool, man, being nominated over half the times. I'm kind of proud to be a part of that club.
And there we go. I've secretly always wanted to make a winner video about Eddie, but I just never had the courage to sit down and actually watch Big Brother 1 until now. And I'm really glad that I did. Yeah, Big Brother 1 is not the Big Brother I originally fell in love with, but it was still a very worthwhile experience. It acts as a time capsule, showing off the original concept of Big Brother, and I feel more connected to the show than ever because I understand its roots and its beginnings in a way that I simply couldn't before watching. I always wrote off Big Brother 1, saying that it didn't belong and merely shared the same name as the show I actually cared about, but I was wrong. Big Brother 1 does belong, and I wanted to help immortalize it by making this video. Thank you so much for watching. Hopefully you found a way to enjoy this, even though it's vastly different from my other winter videos. If you made it this far and aren't subscribed, consider subscribing to help me out. I of course need to give that extra special shout out to all of my YouTube members and patrons who would have obliterated Eddie in that final viewer vote. And, as always, here's a clip for you on your way out.
Oh, there's black ones.
Hey, that's one-legged.
Yeah, I saw that. It's got 3 legs. That's cool. I'm taking that one home with me. What's the 3-legged one? I'm hanging out with him.
Hi, good guy.
Hey, slackers! Oh, man, don't even tell me that they're peeing on my clothes. All right, all you ugly-ass pugs leave. Go home.
Good girl.